What is up, Scream Team? Zach Cherry here, and today we're talking about my absolute favorite subject in the world, who killed who in Scream. So about 5 years ago, I made this video in which I mapped out the entire opening scene of the first movie to essentially show where Billy and Stu were in relation to Casey inside of her house as everything went down. And ever since that video, a lot of people have actually requested that I do the exact same thing, but for the third act of the movie. So basically everything taking place at Stu's house. There is one major caveat though. While that first video could technically be played in tandem with the movie, as like everything lines up perfectly, for this one I decided that I wasn't going to do it in real time just because that is so much effort to try to coordinate. Plus, like, there's so many scenes all over the house that you couldn't do it. It's impossible. Now, before we hit play, I just want to quickly go over the floor plan layout of the house just to give a little bit more context to you guys. But if you'd prefer to just watch the play-by-play simulation, you can go to this timestamp right here. Anyway, I would say this is about 95% accurate. Now, keep in mind, I've never been to the Scream house, but fortunately there are a lot of video tours and photographs and even a real estate listing online that really helped me design this. I also have a Google map image of the aerial view of the house outside that's going to help assist some of the action that takes place in the exterior scenes. But just starting with the ground floor, we have the front porch going into the foyer, stairs to the left. There is the closet at the end of the foyer here that is underneath the stairs. Beyond that, we go into the back foyer, and then there's a back porch, which no one ever goes out that door. Now, in terms of the left side of the house, we don't actually go in here at any point in the movie. However, we do see these areas in Scream 5, so what kind of resembles maybe like a sitting room is Amber's bedroom for some reason in Scream 5. We do see the living room in Scream 5 as well. This is where Chad and Liv have their little fight. Now, coming onto the other side here, let's start over here with the den. This is where so much of the action takes place. You guys are all familiar with the couches and the TV. Moving down from there, we have the kitchen, which is a pretty big space. Like, there is the kitchen itself on one side, and then here's more of like the breakfast nook, I guess, like maybe the dining room area, which then leads into a laundry room, which is then attached to the garage. Now, one thing that is very important to this video is that there is actually a second staircase in this room, which goes up to the attic above the garage. Now, even though we don't see any characters use this staircase, we actually know that it does exist, because if you look at the screen when Tatum is walking away to the garage, you can see the stairs to her left. So we know that it exists and that this is a potential access point for the killers. Now, we have the 3-door garage here with a little doggy door. There's the boat outside, and moving up here, there's also a side patio to the house. There's also 2 bathrooms on the ground floor, but you know, they're kind of irrelevant because we don't see them. And then the last important thing on the ground floor is the pantry, which is attached to the kitchen. Now, in Scream 5, they show this as a basement, or at least the stairs down to the basement. This house does not, in real life, have a basement. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to count this as the pantry. I mean, it could be a basement. It doesn't really change the trajectory of this video. Now, moving upstairs, most of the action is actually taking place on the left side here, which is Stu's parents' bedroom, which is kind of an interesting space because what we see in the movie makes it look a lot smaller than it is. We just see this area right here where the bed is, and then there's a closet and then the master bathroom here, but it actually extends all the way to the back of the house, and this little stairway inlet is what connects to the area where, you know, we see Ghostface run down later, and also where Billy comes out of. So that all connects to the master bedroom. There's also another door to the master bedroom which comes out onto a mezzanine here, which connects to Stu's room. From Stu's room, there's also the access to the attic, which is where the staircase leads to from downstairs in the laundry room. We've also got some closets, a bathroom, another bedroom in the back, which, knowing now that Stu has a sister, Leslie, we can just say that that's her bedroom. And then there's also a study. However, they curtained this door off in the movie, so we never actually see that door here, but just know that it does exist in the actual house. In terms of the exterior, there is a barn here. It's not actually standing landing anymore, so I just had to add one in. But otherwise, here's the little loop that we see, and then there's a separate driveway up to the garage. But for the most part, this is pretty self-explanatory. Anyway, let's get into the action of the movie here. So as we see, the party is already happening by the time Dewey arrives and drops off Sidney and Tatum. They hop out of the car, they make their way inside of the house. All these blank circles are the NPCs and the other party guests, and the ones that have the pictures are the main characters. But we can see that Neil is already in the pantry where he's tied up. While this is happening, we have Gail and Kenny driving up in the van. Dewey's kind of making his way over because, he surprises them and they don't see him walking. So they get out, they're surveying the scene, and this is where Dewey comes up and surprises them and essentially invites Gail to come to the party with him. So they make their way over to the house, and while this is happening, inside we've got, the discussion of the Jamie Lee Curtis movies, like all that. They're voting on, what they're gonna watch. Gail and Dewey make their way to the door. Doorbell rings. Stu asks Tatum to get him another beer from the garage. Stu goes to let Gail and Dewey in, tells everybody that Gail has arrived. Now there's a little bit of drama happening here with Tatum and Dewey. Sidney kind of has this walk by Gail, and then Dewey tells Sidney that they haven't been able to locate her father. Gail is planting the camera, Randy saying something about finding a camera of his own, and Tatum is off to the garage. Now, I think that Billy is already here. He's already at the house, and he is waiting upstairs where he would be able to see or hear if Tatum came through the laundry room downstairs, and this is where he makes his move. Now, I will say that I can't prove 100% that Billy is the one who kills Tatum. I think that this is more of an intuitive thing, just based on the fact that Stu is hosting a party. He doesn't really have a chance to get up and leave. And then there's also the knowing look that they give each other right after this, when Billy comes up to the house. So I'm just gonna say it right now, I can't prove for sure that this is Billy. I'm just going to show you how I think it played out that it was Billy. But if you think that this was Stu, I'm not going to argue that. It very well possibly could have been Stu. I just think intuitively it makes more sense that it is Billy. So anyway, Billy knows that she's coming into the garage. He can now make his move where he comes downstairs, and I guess initially he closes the door. He locks her in, and this is where she comes back up. The cat thing happens, the door's locked. Hey, shitheads, all that. She goes for the garage door. Billy comes in, he closes it behind her. She turns around. They have their little repartee until he slices her arm. She runs backwards, and then this whole cat and mouse thing ensues. She whacks him with the fridge door, tries to run back inside, picks up the beer bottles and hucks them at him. And then she makes a table and trips him over the stairs. So this is the point where she's now going to make it through the door. You can see her struggling through the little cat door. Billy opens the garage, and Tatum is dead. Billy goes back into the party, but instead of going back upstairs, he goes out the patio door, because there are a lot of exits here. And I mean, this is all conjecture, but he could just make his way around the house at this point. We can see inside that people are starting to leave. Gail and Dewey have left. Billy comes over to his perch on the porch and is waiting there as Sidney's looking around for Tatum. Now, I do want to pause for a second here because I think it's important to note that Gail leaves the party, goes back to the van, and we find out about the 30-second delay. So all of this stuff is happening in tandem. It's kind of confusing because it seems like there's been a passage of time with Sidney being ready to leave, but considering Gail's unexpected arrival, it would probably make sense that Sidney would call it an early night. All I can say is that this is all taking place around the same time. So Billy being there at the house means that he was there when Tatum was killed. He wasn't off somewhere else. Anyway, she comes and chats with Stu for a second at the front door, and that's when Billy surprises her. He comes in, they decide that they need to talk. They go up the stairs. Randy's pissed off that Leatherface is there because that's hurting his chances to get with her. And these two go upstairs and make their way into the parents' bedroom, as per Stu's suggestion. Outside, we can see that the people who have just left the party are driving off very weirdly, and Gail has made her way back to the van where she's having that conversation with Kenny about the 30-second delay. And we can also see that Dewey is just kind of hanging out at his cruiser. Anyway, we're back in the bedroom. This conversation is going down. Don't worry, we're not going to go through it in real time. We're instead going to jump back downstairs, and we're now in the den where Randy gets up and he starts explaining the rules to everybody. We obviously know how this all plays out, and then Stu gets up, says he's going to get another beer, and that he'll be right back. And we see him go off to the garage. Now, what he's actually doing is he is going to the garage, but this is where he's just confirming that, yeah, Tatum is dead. And from there, what he's going to do is pull out a phone and call the police, make an anonymous call. He is going to report Neil's car being seen somewhere down the road. Now, the reason for this is because he needs to get rid of Dewey. That's a complication that they cannot have as killers. There can be no police on the scene. So that's happening. Dewey's out at his cruiser. He gets the call. And from there, he decides, well, this is actually a pretty good opportunity. I could ask Gail to go on a little walk with me, and it'll be a nice little romantic date. And she takes him up on that offer. And as we can see, they start moving down the road. Now, from there, Stu goes back into the party, and at this point, more guests are clearing out. Like, that's the thing. The herd is thinning, and this is a scene that we actually see. He's on the porch saying goodbye to people. They're asking what happened to Tatum. I don't know. She probably got pissed off and left. From here, he goes back into the house, and instead of going back into the den, he goes into the laundry room, up the side stairwell, and from there, he gets his costume on, and he makes his way into the parents' bedroom and hides in the bathroom. Now, we know that he's hiding in the bathroom because that's the door that he comes out of. Now, something that also is a really interesting detail, when Sidney and Billy are starting to do their foreplay on the bed, we can see that the door to the mezzanine is closed. But then after another scene transition and we come back to them, that door is now open. So at some point, Stu would have had to have come in that door. There's no other way other than if he went through the main door up the stairs into the parents' bedroom, where they obviously would have seen him as he's walking past the bed. This is really the only way he could get in. And that door is closed 1 minute and then open the next. So make of that what you will. Anyway, from there, he takes out his phone, and this is my own headcanon, but I believe that he's the caller that calls the house, and Randy picks up and reports on Himbry's body being discovered. The reason for this is Stu is trying to get as many people out of the house as possible. He didn't realize that Randy wasn't going to leave. He was just going to stay and watch the movie, but it did its job. We see everyone leaving. They get into the last few cars, and they drunkenly, look at that. They're just going wild there. Kenny's still in the van. We're now up the road. We see Gail and Dewey walking. They're coming pretty close to Neil's car, but whoa, here comes those drunk drivers, and they nearly careen into them, and they make a tumble down that little hill, and that's where they find Neil's car. And that's where he thinks that Neil is the killer, and they've got to get back to the house. We're back upstairs in the bedroom, and she's questioning him about the phone call or whatnot. And he steps over, and this is where Stu comes out. Now, I wanted to ask you guys, because it does seem a little weird that Sidney seems to have a realization about something before she even notices Ghostface come out of the bathroom. So it's almost like she was putting it together that Billy was the killer, because her reaction is not directed towards Ghostface. She hasn't even seen Ghostface yet. I think she realized it at that moment, but then it sort of canceled itself out because of the fake out kill. Anyway, Stu comes in, they do the whole corn syrup thing, and Stu runs around the bed. Sidney jumps over, and she comes out to the mezzanine, closes and locks that door, runs across into Stu's room, and then out the hallway. This is where they meet on the main staircase. She runs back into Stu's room, gets him with the door, and then makes her way into the attic, blocks it with the surfboard. Now, I guess that she didn't see that there was a staircase there. There is a lot of junk in the way, but she goes to that front window trying to get Kenny's attention, and then goes to the side window. And meanwhile, Stu has made his way inside, and while she's out on the roof, they have a little tussle. She falls off onto the boat. and tumbles off to the side. Stu makes his way back downstairs, but at this point Sidney sees Tatum. She runs off, and Stu has come downstairs, but he can hear that there's still somebody in the house. There's Randy yelling at the TV in the den, so he goes to take care of him in that moment, because that is a loose end that he needs to tie up. But while this is happening, Sidney's outside screaming, making her way to Kenny's van, and he lets her in. This is where Stu hears Sidney, goes running out the front porch via the back foyer. And what's interesting, if you actually look at the scene, you can notice that when Sidney is running to the van, we can see the house behind her. The front door is closed, but then moments later, it is open. So we know that this is how Stu came running out. Also, I just want to quickly pause it right here because I know that it was actually Skeet Ulrich who was in the mask in this scene, hovering above Randy, but just because I know that a lot of people buy into that canon that that is Billy just because it was Skeet, that's not a logical conclusion that any of this evidence would allow you to come to. Anyway, Stu comes running out. He must have veered off to the side here to then circle back to the van, but here's Kenny kind of waffling in and out of the van. Stu comes up from the side, slices him. He falls down. Sidney locks the van door and starts to crawl through, but Stu makes his way in, and as she's crawling out the back, he kind of gets stuck there, but she runs off, and this is where she presumably hides in this barn, because that's directionally where we saw her running. While this is all happening, Billy is upstairs. He's probably getting really anxious. What is going on without him? He's the mastermind here. He doesn't like not being in control. So he's coming down, putting on his costume, wherever that may be, coming out the front, and meeting Stu at the van here. Now, I will say that this is just headcanon that I've created. Billy doesn't have to leave the house at this point, but I think just by the very nature that Kenny's body was lifted up and put on top of the van, that is a two-person job. So I think that at the very least, both of them would have had to do that. So I'm just going to say that he came out here and assisted Stu. So here they are, putting Kenny's body up on the van. As this is happening, Randy is inside and he decides he wants another beer. So he gets up and he makes his way to the garage. And that's where he sees Tatum and freaks out. And we know this happens because his dialogue later on confirms this.
Shoot it to me! I found Tatum! She's dead!
Going back outside, Gale and Dewey are making their way back. They have their flashlights, so they would be visible from a bit of a distance, which alerts Billy and Stu. Billy runs back inside the house while Stu goes running in the opposite direction where Sidney was last seen running so he can try to find her. We see that Gale and Dewey stop in front of his cruiser. He's going inside the house. He tells her to call for help. We can see that Randy is now exiting the garage. Gale comes to the van, finds all the blood. Kenny is nowhere in sight. Randy comes up to the side and surprises her, where she then knocks him out and she backs up. Here comes Kenny rolling off the roof. Kind of funny, we do see Randy in this shot as she's driving by, and then later we see him hobbling up to the house. So it kind of makes me think that she might have run over his foot. It just seems like something that might have happened here. But regardless, Gale gets Kenny off of the windshield. Sidney, who's heard all this commotion, comes running out of the barn and makes her way to the road where Gale steers off to the side to avoid hitting her, goes down the hill and crashes into the trees over here. Now at this point, Sidney is running back to the house, and here's Stu. He's hearing all this commotion too, and he runs over to the van to investigate what happened. And this is a very important plot point, and we know this because later on there is this dialogue where Billy reiterates this fact to Stu, who then verifies it.
Man, I thought she was dead. She looked dead, man. Still does.
So we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Stu did at some point find Gale where he thought she was dead. Anyway, let's just backtrack a little bit here because we have to show what was going on inside of the house with Dewey while this was all going on outside. So going back a minute or so here, we see Gale and Dewey coming back to the house. Billy runs inside. Now, this is more so headcanon. I think that he hides right here in the foyer behind the door. And the reason for this is because if you watch the movie, when Dewey comes into the house, the front door closes by itself behind him. Now, I know that this might have just been a little cheeky thing that Wes Craven might have done. But again, I like to infuse logic into everything that I do with these theories. So I think that Billy is crouched down there and he closed the door behind Dewey, and Dewey's got his back turned to the kitchen at this point, where I think that Billy then crept inside. He's crouched down low and he went and hid behind the wall here. So this then precipitates this cat and mouse game between the two of them, where Billy is tracking Dewey on the other side of the wall. We know that Dewey kind of comes through the back foyer. He sort of peeks in the den, but then he comes back into the back foyer and the scene cuts at this point. But let's just say, just based on the trajectory of where he's discovered when Sidney runs up to the house, he moves over onto the left side of the house. So he makes his way into the living room and Billy's just kind of following behind, just kind of stealthily creeping up behind him. Now, while this is happening, this is where Sidney's running back to the house. She's screaming Dewey. And at this point, Billy takes that as an opportunity to go up behind him, stab him in the back. And that's when we see her run up to the front porch. He stumbles out the door, and then Ghostface reveals himself, comes over to Dewey, pulls the knife out, and then chases her over to the cruiser, which she gets into and locks the door. Now, again, going back to what I said before, Billy did not have to ever leave the house to assist in moving Kenny's body onto the top of the van, but he was in the house, and this would have been him, because while this is all going down, Stu is off finding Gale in the van. So again, another cat and mouse game here. She's radioing for help as Billy creeps in through the hatchback and then starts to strangle her. I will also point out that choking his victims is something that is more of a Billy thing. We see him doing it at the very end of the movie with Sidney. People have said that Stu also does it as well. That is not true. He just has her pinned down. He's not actually choking her at any point, but this is also why my theory is that Billy is the one that stabs Casey in the beginning. Anyway, Sidney gets free and starts running back towards the front door. Billy takes off through the hatchback, and this is where he bumps into Stu, who's now running back to the house after discovering Gale. Now, this is a very important element here, because this is the only time where Stu could feasibly have this conversation with Billy. There is no other time in the movie.
Man, I thought she was dead. She lived dead, man. Still does.
Everything else we see between them after this is after they're unmasked, and we are with them the entire time, and at no point does Stu say to Billy, Gale is dead, she crashed the car. So this is something that happened off screen. So if your belief is that Billy was in the bedroom upstairs after faking his death the entire time, and that this was Stu who stabbed Dewey and chased Sidney out and in the car and all that, that would essentially give Stu 10 to 15 seconds to jump out of the hatchback, run all the way back to the wooded area to discover Gale's van and thinking that Gale is dead, coming back to the house, going in, I guess, the patio door, the garage door, going upstairs through the side stairwell, going to Billy in the bedroom, telling him this information, and then going back downstairs through the side stairwell, outside the garage, and running back up to the front door, which happens here when Randy comes up. And there's just no feasible way that could happen in a 10 to 15 second span. Even if you want to believe that he discovered Gale before he came back to the house and stabbed Dewey, that still wouldn't be possible, because Sidney runs right back to the house as soon as Gale crashes the car. There is no time for him to find Gale and get back to the house before her, let alone tell Billy about it. So what actually happens is that Billy and Stu reconvene right here outside of the garage, and Billy instructs Stu to go back to the front house. They need to trap Sidney inside, and this is all happening as Randy is coming up to the house. So we see Randy coming up to the house first. Stu then comes up behind him. They're pleading with Sidney. She's got Dewey's gun now, and while this is all going down, this is where Billy comes back into the house, through the garage, goes up the side stairwell, makes his way through Stu's room, across the mezzanine, back into the bedroom. Meanwhile, downstairs, we see that Sidney has sort of backed herself inside of the house. Stu and Randy are still trying to plead with her. Randy runs up, but she slams the door in his face and locks it. And this is where Billy takes his cue. He comes down these stairs into the main stairwell, which is where we see him. And then he tumbles down the stairs right into Sidney's arms. He then walks over to the front door with her, takes the gun, and he lets Randy in. And as we can see, this is where Stu is now running to the side of the house to make his way inside. Billy, we all go a little mad sometimes, shoots Randy. Sidney goes over to his side, and Stu has made his way into the kitchen as she runs literally right into him. They bump into each other right there. And now this is where kind of like everything that happens, we mostly see. So they've kind of cornered her into the kitchen and start talking about their dastardly plan. So, here's where, I wasn't going to do everything in real time because this all plays out over like the span of 10 minutes. So you can just imagine everything playing out as it does, but I have captured the important details, like Stu putting the gun down on the counter, where he then moves into the pantry to get Neil. And while all this is happening, we then have to remember that Gail comes too in the van, and she starts to make her way back towards the house. But we have Stu bringing Neil out. Sidney discovers her dad is there. Billy and Stu discuss what their plan is, and then they start to stab each other. And Stu's able to take it pretty well, but Billy kind of stumbles off to the side there because I guess he was cut too deep. But they're pretty distracted here, and this is where Gail comes up to the house. She comes in, notices the gun, and she grabs it and hides behind the wall there. And then obviously Billy tells Stu to go get the gun. Houston, we have a problem. When Billy comes over to see what's going on, that's when Gail comes out and has her triumphant little monologue until it is discovered that works better without the safety on. And Billy takes the gun and knocks her out. She falls over onto Dewey, which then causes Stu to come out into the foyer, which gives Sidney the perfect opportunity to grab Dad, hightail it out of the kitchen, sneak around into the back foyer. Stu then discovers that Sidney and Neil are gone. They go back into the kitchen, and as soon as Billy has cleared the way there, Sidney darts into the closet with Dad. She then takes out the phone and calls the house. Billy goes to pick that up and have all this action, hands the phone over to Stu. He kind of goes looking around for a second. He's getting really angry, comes back in, grabs the phone, is screaming at her, and then throws it at Stu. Now he's going into the den. He's just cutting up pillows. Feathers are flying everywhere. Sidney's still talking to Stu on the phone until Billy comes over and she hangs up. He starts to make his way into the foyer, where he then has a sneaking suspicion that she's in that closet. And he goes up to the door, and that's where she jumps out, stabbing him with the umbrella. He drops the gun. She picks it up, throws it towards the front door. Stu comes crashing through. They have their little scuffle. She knees him in the crotch. He punches her, and the chase ensues into the den, where they go flying over the couch. He's got her pinned to the floor. She bashes his head with a vase. He rolls over. She gets up and drops the TV on his head, and he is electrocuted to death. And she makes her way back into the foyer. And then here's where Randy surprises her. He's still alive, and before anything else can happen, Billy gets up, punches Randy, throws Sidney onto the floor. He's choking her. He picks up that knife, ready to end her. Gail comes to, grabs the gun, and shoots Billy. And he kind of coughs and crawls back over to the side there, and Sidney helps Randy up. They go towards Gail. Sidney takes the gun. They walk back over to Billy, and they're just watching over him. And he comes back for one last scare, startles Gail and Randy, but not Sidney. She's ready to shoot him in the head. Then Neil comes crashing out of the closet. Sidney comes over to untie him, drops the gun, gets Randy to come over and help, and Gail just sort of lingers, and that's essentially the end of all the action here. Anyway, if you've not yet seen the mapping out video for Casey Becker's house, the link to that is right over here. Also, if you like this content and want to give back a little, you can go support me on Patreon. I want to shout out a few of my top tier supporters, so thank you to Craig Lynn, Stephanie Starbright, and Josh Burrow. Until next time, thank you for watching. I've been Zach Cherry, and I'll be right back.